Welcome back everyone to 3D modeling a Hobbit door scene with Blender 2.9 and Adobe Photoshop. So this is where we left it off, and you can see at the moment the standard material that comes in is called a principled BSDF. So every time you bring a material in, this is what Blender will try and bring in. And this basically is a super node. That's what I class it as, and I think that's what a lot of people call it, because basically you've got so many plugins to this. You can change the metallic, the roughness, everything is within this actual material node. So that is why it brings it in as standard, and that is why it's so useful. So now what we need to do is we need to move this material output just a little bit over here. So let's pull it over here like so with a left click and drag. Now the other thing that you really want to do just to make things a little bit easier is to bring in the actual node wrangler. It's another add-on within Blender, and I'll put it down the bottom right hand side here, telling you a little bit of what that's about. Now to bring that in, we're going to go back up to Edit, Preferences, let it load up, come to Add-ons, click the X, and let's bring Node, N-O-D-E, Node Wrangler, tick it on, click Refresh, close it down. Now let's bring in our first node, and that's going to be a color ramp. So if I press Shift-A, search, and I'm going to bring color, so COL, and you'll see one that's called color ramp. Let's bring that in. Now let's plug this color ramp into our metallic. So I'm going to plug this into the metallic, which is here. So I'm going to pull this up a little bit just so you can see a little bit more what I'm doing. And I'm also going to put this onto Eevee renderer, which should be this one here. Let's just make sure it is on Eevee. I'm just making sure. I'm going to double tap the A just to get that off so I can see what I'm doing. And yeah, the actual sun I can see is shining on here. I've got some shading on here. And the other thing I want to do is I just want to make sure ambient occlusion is also on. And you can see when I tick that on, it really emphasizes the actual shadow. So it makes it a little bit easier to actually see what we're actually doing. Okay, so now that's sorted, let's zoom in a little bit more. And then what we've got here is the metallic plugged in at the moment. Let's actually change the base color. So if I change this, for instance, pull this down, you can see it goes much darker. So this is actually the base color of this. And this metallic we're going to change in a minute just to make it a little bit more shinier because it's a little bit too dull for actual metal. Okay, so now let's work on the roughness. So we've done the color, which is the base color. We've done the metallic. Well, we've plugged it into a node ready to actually set up. So now let's work on the roughness. What we're going to bring in is a noise texture. So NOI, and you'll see one that's called noise texture. Let's put that in there, and we're going to plug the color into our roughness. Now, what this does is it basically creates a lot of noise within this actual texture. So if I go in now and I put this on something like 275, for instance, you can see now that we've got a lot of noise on there, really giving us a lot of kind of dirt and things like that. And this, because it is the roughness, actually interacts with the actual light. So as I turn around, you can see some are in a bit darker and lighter. And it's a bit like glass. When you look at glass, it's not actually perfectly see-through. You'll have smearing on there. You'll have little bits of dirt. You maybe have some scratches, things like that. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here. Okay, so let's now put the detail up to something like 14. Let's try that. Let's make it a little bit less emphasis on there. We don't want it too dark after all. And then let's turn this up to something like 0.65, something like that should be absolutely fine. All right, so now let's work on our normal map just to bring this out a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to this point here. I'm going to press Shift-A. I'm going to press T-E-X. And I want to bring in a texture coordinate. And this is basically how you can apply our first procedural material based on the UV. So we unwrap them all, and now we want to base it on the UV. In other words, tell Blender where to actually apply this procedural material. So we need something else as well, and we need a mapping. So let's bring in that, Shift-A, bring in a mapping. Throw that there, and then what we need to do is we need to connect up the vector, because the vector is basically where the position is. So we grab the UV, plug it into the vector, and that's good to go. Now let's bring in another texture, noise texture, and we'll bring in a Voronoi. So we'll click here, Shift-A, search, VOR, Voronoi texture. Let's bring that in, and then again, we're going to plug the vector into the vector of the Voronoi, and now we want to color ramp. And a color ramp basically can emphasize colors. It can emphasize how much bumpiness you've got within the material, things like that. A color ramp isn't just for color. So let's bring in a color ramp. So Shift A, search, color ramp, and let's drop that in there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab our color and put it into the fact of the actual color ramp. Now let's grab the principled, move it over a little bit, and what we're going to bring in now is a bump. Shift A, search, B-U-M-P, bump. Let's bring that in, put that on there, and then let's bring the color from the color ramp into the height of the bump. And then what we'll do is we'll bring the normal and plug that into there like so. Let that load up, and now you can see we've got all these little ridges on there. Not exactly what we want, but we are getting there. So now, how do we change this? Well, the one thing we can do, or the main thing we can do, is change the Voronoi texture first, because that is the thing that says how big or small these kind of noises are. So let's zoom in a little bit and change the scale of this to something like 5,000. And now you can see we've got a lot more actual bumpiness on there, and that's exactly what we're looking for. I'm kind of trying to go with the look of when you've got LED, like leaded windows, that's the kind of look. We need a lot of bumpiness. So now what we need to do is we need to come and bring the strength down. So you can see over here on our bump, as I bring this down, you'll see now that it gets smoother or it gets a little more bumpy. And you can see now this is the kind of look we're actually going for. And this I'm really, really happy with already. Now, the other thing is you can use the color ramp, as you can see, as a kind of ability to really ramp it up or make it smoother. So in other words, what it does is, because you've got a color ramp here, if I zoom in a little bit, these parts that are flat here, we can actually dictate how, let's just drag it across, as you can see now, how bumpy that actually is. We've got a lot of control, a lot more control than just the strength. So the strength will do everything, whereas the color ramp will really start to make them less bitty, as you can see, or more bitty, whichever you choose. So I'm going to bring that in. I'm going to bring this one down just a little bit like so. All right, so that I'm really happy with. Now, the last of all, we need to actually mess around with the actual metallic. So as you can see, if I bring this up, I can make this more metallic, and that is what the look I'm going for. So you can see that we've got bits that are more metallic, bits that are less metallic based on our actual roughness, which is basically a noise texture. So that I'm actually really happy with. The last thing is you might want to mess around with your base color, so you can bring this up, make it darker or lighter. So at the moment, I think maybe that's a little bit too dark. So let's bring it back just a little bit like so. All right, so that I'm actually really happy with. And what I'll do is I'll actually pull this down now, and we can actually split this up. So on the next lesson then, what we'll start to do is work on our actual glass within here. But that's your first procedural material finished. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned a lot, and I'll see you on the next one, everyone. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.